Welcome to the Smores Indoors Podcast, the perfect combination of talk and interviews between my favorite podcast hosts. Now please sit back, relax, and welcome your host, Corey.
Welcome to the Smores Indoors Podcast. I'm Corey, your host, joined by my co-host here, Jonathan. Jonathan, what's going up? It's been a while since we've done this.
I forgot we had a podcast.
I did too.
I'm not gonna lie. It's like we did all this other stuff. We probably did more stuff on break, and I forgot we had a whole other thing that like is the driving force behind it. So good to be back.
Yes. Yeah, I hope everyone's been checking out the stuff we've been doing over on the YouTube channel. A lot of cool stuff, a lot of growth over there, and hopefully you guys, if you haven't checked out this show and you've watched stuff there, you'll come over here and check us out, and vice versa, because we're trying to do a lot of different cool things to entertain you guys. So hopefully you're having a good time with it. So I know we are. I've been having a fun time doing that different type of stuff that we've been doing.
For sure, man. I mean, you know, and I'm really excited to see what 2021 holds for the show, like in general. Just branching out, trying different things, just having fun.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun trying the new things we've been doing, and got some more ideas. Just gotta get things organized and get them started. But we'll get that going, and yeah, it'll be a fun time. I know we did a show. It'll be a few days ago whenever you see this or hear this, but did a show about Art Bell, which was really awesome, and had a couple buddies hop on and talk as well, and that was a fun time, I thought.
Oh, for sure, man. I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we'll get that set up soon, and stay tuned to our YouTube channel. Make sure you like it, subscribe, and get those notifications so you can know when the next episode's coming out of that, and everything else we're doing, hot pepper challenge, things like that. So
yeah, and once again, thank you guys so much for the growth over there. It's been awesome, you know, just to see you guys pouring over there and showing support. We love it. We love you guys. Let's just keep it up and keep it going.
Definitely. So as we come into 2021, Jonathan, you know, beyond growth of the show and things like that, do you have any resolutions you're trying to stick to this year?
I have a resolution to keep being awesome. That's my big resolution this year. I think I did a bang up job of awesomeness in 2020. We're gonna keep that rolling into 2020. I don't do the resolution thing because I give up on it so hard. Like I fail so hard. I guess you could say my resolution is to not be disappointed in myself.
Well, we all got that one. Yeah. I have the same one every year, is get in better shape, but then, you know, I knocked it out of the park the second day of the year and ate a big bunch of Mexican food and cheese and whatever. So, you know, but every day is a new day. So that's what I tell myself.
Exactly. You know, we still got Chinese New Year coming up at some point. Maybe that's when I'll get my act together, right?
Maybe I'll go on their calendar from now on. I don't know. So. But anyway, guys, another thing to go along with the new year is we want to continue to grow this show. And I think we got probably our biggest guest yet for today's show. Huge interview. And we're not going to waste any time. We're going to go right into it. We have today an interview with Angelo Pizzo. He is the writer and producer of films like Hoosiers and Rudy, and just legendary writer in the sports movie field. And after the interview, we're going to come back, talk about some of our favorite sports movies. So stick around for that and enjoy this interview with Angelo Pizzo. Angelo, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there like everybody else.
Right.
On this crazy time.
Yes, it's something new around the corner every day. So, but we're only a couple months away from getting out of it, hopefully. Although things will probably will progress past the end of the year.
You're very optimistic. If you think it's going to be a couple of, you think it's going to be a couple of months. I'm sorry, somebody's calling me. I have to.
Okay.
Tell them not to. All right, go ahead.
I try to be optimistic. But I'm excited to talk to you about your career and things like that. So I want to start though early. What were some of the experiences that you had, or maybe there are specific movies that you watched when you were younger that kind of developed an interest in filmmaking for you.
Well, I mean, it was a long story in a sense, but um, it's where my love of movies first manifested was probably watching the late shows on the movies, the older movies like the John Ford westerns
Right.
um, on television. And then when I was allowed to go to the movies myself, and of course this will indicate how times have changed. I was probably 8 or 9 years old when I could go to movies by myself. And where our house was in Bloomington was about 10 blocks from all three of the theaters downtown.
Right.
So I would just make a kind of a rotation of whatever new movie were there. And my dad remembers me going sometimes on Saturday around noon and watching the same movie about 6 or 7 times. So yeah, my love of movies really happened early, uh, but I guess passion for movies began probably when I was 13, 14, 15.
Okay.
And those were the years where they made the great epic films, some biblical like Ben-Hur or El Cid, um, and West Side Story. But my favorite movie of all time is Lawrence of Arabia.
Okay.
And now moving forward, just to put it all into context, I never really thought about movies as a career at all growing up because I knew no one. I had no role models that were identifiable and or known personally, and so I just always thought of movies as an avocation, not a vocation.
Right.
So when I went to college, my degree was in political science, and I was going to go to law school. I was going to either diplomatic school or law school in Washington D.C. and probably try for a career in politics.
Right.
And then a little thing called the Vietnam War got in the way of that and kind of blew up my world. And then I, kind of got lost for a few years between my undergraduate and graduate years. And it was at that time that I kind of just had to make a hard decision about what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And my dad was very encouraging of following the things, trying to create a career around something you love,
Sure.
which means, getting up every day and looking forward to going to work. And so he supported and encouraged and allowed 3 years at USC film school, graduate school, to get me to create opportunities for myself to start a career in the film business.
Right. That's great. I want to go back a little bit. You're talking about kind of growing up there in Bloomington, which I love Bloomington. It's, I've been to a lot of college towns, a lot of college campuses, but it's pretty unique, I think. What makes Bloomington a special town for you?
Well, I mean, I'm biased. I grew up here. And then to give you another sense of the context is I went to Indiana University undergraduate school, as I mentioned, USC grad school. And then I stayed in Los Angeles, the various areas of Los Angeles I lived for 30 years.
Right.
And when in 2005, I had two sons who were 10 and 7, and we were becoming concerned about how the nature of the school choices that we had in Santa Monica.
Right.
Which either the public schools were pretty awful, and the private schools, it wasn't their expense, but it was I guess made up of mostly celebrity sons and daughters and elite.
Okay.
And we just didn't think it was a healthy environment psychologically
Right.
For our kids to grow up there. So we moved back to Bloomington in 2005, and I've been here ever since. So it was a great move. And the things that I appreciate about Bloomington, I really only got a sense of what they were when I left it.
Sure.
And I've been able to compare it to other college towns of its ilk, especially Big Ten college towns, because I've been to every university town in the Big Ten. And I think in part is the combination or the balance between town and gown. It is the number of normal citizens who are not connected to the university and the university.
Right.
So the average age in Bloomington is 21. Now you won't find that in any other Midwestern city.
Right.
And that creates a kind of a vitality and an energy and a hopefulness and an optimism because people's lives are just starting. And it's very much of a company town, as opposed to Madison, for example, or Columbus. They're just really big cities with big university in them. But they're different worlds if you live in whatever section of Columbus. It's just, it gets lost. Kind of like Austin. I spent a year in Austin 4 years ago making a movie. And Austin used to be kind of a college town. Now it's just, University of Texas is stuck in the middle of a
right.
metropolis of around 2 million people. So I really do think it's a kind of the perfect balance between the population is probably, I think it was 85,000 Bloomington, and there are 48,000 students. So that's a good balance.
Right.
Plus the fact that it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful campuses. It was my playground growing up. I also think, it has the luxury of having two of high-powered Big Ten, now a football team, now a football program. Of course, basketball is it's just fun to participate in all of the university events. And speaking of the university, the other thing that was really appealing to my wife at the time was the number of cultural opportunities offered by the university. I mean, it's a world-class institution, one of the best music schools in the country, and has Broadway plays and operas and ballets coming through, a world-class cinema, and various intellectuals, lecturers, performers, giving you access to things you never would have unless you lived in a big city. And even if you lived in a big city like we did in Los Angeles, it's a big, I mean, you have to get in the car and deal with the traffic for an hour each way. And, you can get everywhere in Bloomington in like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So, it's, I mean, I could go on and on about it. And I'll just add one other thing. For a town of 85,000, it's pretty amazing. There are 75 Asian restaurants in this town.
Oh, wow.
So the choices, the dining choices are really broad ranged and significant.
Right. So I want to talk about your time at Indiana, and that's where you met kind of your career partner, David Anspaugh. Of course, you both went to USC as well. But over the years, that relationship, that friendship, how did that develop into the working partnership you ended up having?
Well, as you mentioned, we met each other. We were members of the same fraternity. He was a year older than I was, and still is, by the way. We just hit it off. I think in part was because our shared love of movies. He was a passionate movie devotee as I was. So we went to movies together, the special screenings on campus, and we actually started talking about making our own movies. And David had an old Bolex 16 millimeter camera, and he started shooting films. So I was involved in helping him and making films. I mean, it just became part of our passion. So he graduated. I stayed another year, And it was he moved to Aspen in part to teach there, in part to ski there, and ended up working for the Aspen Ski Corporation. And when I graduated, I went out there and I joined him, and I skied most of a season in 1972. So, and then at that point, that's when I kind of decided I could have easily gotten lost in the Aspen ski culture for a very long time. But, it became very apparent to me that I needed to make a life choice decision in terms of career. And that's when I flew home and had a long discussion with my dad and ended up applying to USC and going there. And then when I went to USC, I was talking up the film school with David all the time. And he's, through circumstances I won't get into, not because I don't want to, we probably don't have time. He ended up coming out there and going to grad school as well. So we had always talked about someday making a movie together and someday making a film about basketball in Indiana, because that was one of our discussion points about the Milan story. What would make a great Indiana movie set, a great movie set in Indiana? And that was always at the top of the list. Believe it or not, another was something around the Little 500. This is way before Breaking Away ever happened.
Right.
And so we, to fast forward very quickly, we maintained really close friendship during that time. I mean, I was practically the only person he knew when he moved to Los Angeles. And I got a job out of film school and worked as a producer's assistant for 6 months. And then I went on got involved in a series of jobs that were so beneficial, so educational. I worked as a supervisory producer. I worked as an executive for some bigger studios. And I worked with some great filmmakers, and learned how to feel comfortable in taking on a role myself. And so what I decided to do was to write a script that was based on the Milan story, and I gave it to David. I said, let's team it up. Let's get this done. Let's make it together, because subsequently he had started to work in television, scripted episodic television, and started as an associate producer, and ended up getting a number of different gigs to direct. And he had directed like 20 different episodes of shows like Hill Street Blues, Miami Vice, St. Elsewhere. And even won an Emmy for one of his Hill Street Blues. So we decided to team up then.
Right. Well, I want to talk obviously about Hoosiers and that Milan story. It's such an iconic story in kind of Indiana basketball lore. But was there, I know you said that was kind of the top of the list. Were there ever any thoughts of a different story to go with in that script?
Well, all the stories that we talked about doing, in part because I was a huge sports fan, because I was thinking about developing these various projects when I was an executive, because I was in that position of power to do so. And I actually got the go ahead to direct to develop the Indiana basketball story, the high school basketball story, by the president of the company I worked for. And I started looking for writers to write it. And I wanted to find somebody from Indiana. And I got a lot of the agents sending me sample scripts. And I read a ton of them, and none of them really felt right to me. And it was just so happening that the company I was working for is called Time Life Films, when they were making feature films as well as television movies and whatnot. They had to disband their production wing because of an antitrust suit, and they they broke up their assets and put it into HBO and then TriStar. And I was offered a job at HBO, or I had a contract. They paid my contract out in full, And if I had gotten along with the president of HBO at the time, I might have taken that job, but we didn't see eye to eye in just about anything. So I decided to take that little financial gift of settlement for my contract and write the Hoosier script on spec.
Right. Okay. So I it's kind of funny the memories you have over the years, but a few years ago I was up at Bloomington and photographing the Indiana-Purdue football game. And the game wrapped up in the early evening. I was driving home and I just turned the radio on and found just a random high school basketball game on. And it kind of gave me that comforting or peaceful feeling on that drive home, which is kind of the same feeling I get watching Hoosiers. It feels so Southern Indiana to me, just watching that movie. And I'm sure a lot of people have that same kind of emotional response to it. Is that a challenge to kind of write something that elicits a response like that without going too maybe overly melodramatic?
Well, I think there's a bunch of questions in there.
Right.
I'll try to separate them out. One is it's difficult to write any script. It's always difficult to realize your intentions as a writer, because your idea and your thoughts about what that movie should be and what kind of feelings it should evoke, it never reaches the bar that you set for it.
Right.
So, and the part two of that question was, well, let me go back to part one, only insofar as I'd never written a script.
Right.
So it was kind of, but I had worked with a lot of really talented, successful writers in the process of that 6-year executive supervisorial producer kind of roles that I was doing. But also, it still didn't matter if you haven't, when you sit down and you face that blank piece of paper.
Sure.
There's nothing more horrific. And I'll also say that I probably read 1,000 screenplays before I wrote my first scene.
Right.
And it still didn't help me, because I think in order to write from an authentic emotional place, you can't write from an analytical place. You
Right.
can't, I suppose if you're putting together a very specific plot-driven, not character-driven movie, you can move characters around like chess pieces and you can do that kind of outlining. But I found that when I tried to outline the story, I didn't know who the characters were, so I didn't know what they were going to do. I didn't have a feel for it.
Right.
And I only got a feel for it when I started writing and their dialogue started to emerge. And, it's an old saw that if you make a connection to the characters you create, they'll help you tell the story.
Right.
I'll give you a little example of that, which is conceptually on the rough outline that I had that I end up throwing away. I was trying to figure out a way for the coach to become close to the players. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways in which I thought of was to have one of the kids' father be a drunk and not available for the kid. So the coach would function as a surrogate father, so to speak.
Right.
So I only meant that character to be a device. And this was I think I was 30 pages in the screenplay, and I decided to have that character kind of stumble out and cause disruption and embarrass his son. And it was how the coach was going to manage that, which was what my focus was. I didn't really think about who that drunk was.
Right.
He was a generic drunk. So, but somehow, and this can happen in a serendipitous way when you're writing, is there was a connection made between that character Shooter and the coach. I found that, I thought about it later, and it was that they saw each other's shadow. If you understand the concept, they saw each other's dark. They connected subconsciously to each other's dark side because each had a dark side,
Right.
and they both had a passion for basketball. They really were a variation of each other. They were a version of each other. I think that Gene, in a sense, Gene, I kind of mixed them up now. The coach was a very close cousin in a conceptual way to that character. So I realized I had to bring him back, and that I had to develop that relationship further. So I just experimentally came up with another scene just to see what they would be like in the diner, and of course that scene
Right.
is still there. And then kind of that character of Shooter just wanted to take over the whole script. And he became very assertive. It became very powerful presence in the script, and he helped determine how that movie turned out. Now, if I'd written strictly from an outline, that character never would have existed. And of course, the great irony when I talk to screenwriters about this, don't get too locked into your outlines, or don't even do an outline. Actually, I have a version of an outline which I think you could sum up in about. I think an outline should be no longer than maybe 10 sentences in one page. That would be
Okay.
my. It's like creating a roadmap from going to New York to Los Angeles. You want to know the cities you're going to stop by,
Right.
just so you don't want it to go over a territory that's totally unknown. Anyway, so the kind of the subset or the irony is that here is a character I never considered putting in the movie 30 pages into it. And this character ends up getting nominated for the best supporting actor in the Academy Award. So
Right.
you just have to be open to those kind of things that happen. Now, the second part of your question, which was the emotion or emotionality that we aim for, and someone described, and it's always it's a very fine line, okay,
Right.
and people draw that line at different places. It's almost like some people think some things are funny, and other people don't think it's funny.
Right.
What some people think is corny or sentimental in a negative way. Sentimentality is a pejorative version of the word sentiment. Is different. People draw different lines. Says, oh God, and the reviews show that, as well as in Rudy too.
Yeah.
I mean, we got a ton of, and the last film I did, My All American, it's the same variation of the reviews. People either give into or go for it or connect to the emotion that we attempt to create, or they step back from it and push it away and feel it's too manipulative, too corny, too sentimental. So we're always aware of the how fine that line is between sentiment and sentimentality, but it's still our taste. And
Right.
and I could tell you that there were many times when we working on Hoosiers where David and I have a clash about that, because we were not the same people, and we would draw lines in a different way. I'll give you another example. Working with one of the greatest considered among the top 5 composers to ever live, film composers, Jerry Goldsmith, who was nominated for an Academy Award for his score for Hoosiers. When we were in the recording studio doing various bits in sections, there was one time that he was playing. It was like a sectional game, and I really had a problem with how big it sounded.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to David, and David agreed, and we went to Jerry and said, it's too much. We have nowhere to go with this. It feels like, do we have to have, all 40 strings playing, when
Right.
it's like, so he cut everything back and we modulated. He took a lot of stuff out, both in Hoosiers and Rudy. That we found out that was the way to work with him. He would always go big and kind of expect the filmmakers to dial it down.
Right.
That was always his instinct, because he was a very feeling person.
Sure.
And he would compose in a way that would express those emotions.
Right. Well, you talked a little bit about the characters on the page, but let's touch on the actors that portray those roles. Dennis Hopper and Gene Hackman are, a lot of times considered 2 of the greatest actors in their generation. But you said in a past interview that, neither one was a very hot commodity coming into the film. But what did they bring to the movie that made it such a special film?
Well, Gene is simply, as you mentioned, one of the greatest actors working in our time. He's retired now.
Right.
And we were very lucky to have got him when we did, because he had a big success, a series of successful films nominated for Academy Awards. French Connection was probably the height.
Mm-hmm.
Then he took, I think he was in like 7 movies where he was the kind of the lead actor, and all of them tanked. So
Right.
his career was in a kind of a, it was in a, he tried to go from character actor to lead actor, and because it worked for Popeye in French Connection, where he played Popeye Doyle.
Mm.
But you know, it wasn't like he couldn't get work, but I think there was something in the film that obviously worked for him. But he wasn't terribly happy about what his situation was in his career, and he was he was pretty. Look, the fact is that the character of Norman Dale was had a significant dark side, obviously a temper, but you know, he was a depressive too. I mean, that was pretty clear. And this is a guy who probably had to deal with his own demons all the time, and that was Gene. And obviously, he must have seen something himself in that
Right.
character. He was also grew up in Danville, Illinois, and
Okay.
that's right across the border. And so he understood these small towns. He understood the people in the town. There was a connection, a relatability. I can't say he was the easiest person to work with, because he did not feel comfortable with our lack of experience. David never directed a feature. I'd never produced or written a feature, and we were running the show. I mean, we had an independent financier who never showed up on the set, so we had free reign to do whatever we wanted to. That was the good news and bad news. It was not. It was bad news for him. It was made him very uncomfortable, and also made Barbara Hershey very uncomfortable. They were not. They were not thrilled about our amateur status, and they're. On the other hand, Gene or Dennis was it was a completely different situation. We were casting that role in Los Angeles. We read a lot of really good actors, and the role I mean the actor I wrote it for was a character actor named Harry Dean Stanton,
Mm-hmm.
and he turned it down. And so that kind of we just were I mean we read tons of people, but nothing quite resonated. Then David happened to be at a restaurant and he saw Dennis Hopper, and it you know, he was surprised he was still alive. I mean, Dennis kind of disappeared through I mean, dealing with drugs and alcohol, and he'd been in and out of rehab and so on for a long time. Hadn't appeared in any movies forever, and Dennis, David went up and talked to him, and started talking to him because it just popped in his mind. I mean, who would know more about alcoholism than a guy who's, you know, and Dennis had told him that he had been sober for a year and a half,
Right.
and that he was looking to get back in the business and looking to get roles, and he was seriously in discussion with another great director, David Lynch,
Mm-hmm.
do Blue Velvet. So you know, but he hadn't been hired yet. So when he brought David invited to come in and have a conversation, and I just remember Dennis sitting down across from us and says, in a very kind of wide-eyed, vulnerable way, "I know this guy," and you knew he really knew this guy. So we just felt an electricity, you know, a connection with Dennis, and the only problem we had in casting him was the insurance company. You have to bond. You get bonded to do a film,
Right.
and an insurance company didn't want to insure us because of him and his alcohol and his drugs and alcohol related incidents over the year. But we got it through, and at the same time, David Lynch also hired him. So when he showed up on the set 2 weeks into shooting, he had just gotten off the plane, working with David on Blue, and he played a character that that many people thought he should be nominated for Academy Award, but he ended up being nominated with our character instead. But it's probably a double thing.
Yeah.
But Dennis was he had kind of worked through his darkness in a way. I mean, he was upfront about his vulnerabilities and he was very hard. He was a very sweet guy, and because he had directed a number of movies, including Easy Rider, an iconic film from the 70s, he got what we were doing, and he was tremendously supportive. He was there 100% for us. The only problem we had with Dennis is he couldn't remember lines. Too many brain cells had been burned out. And but sometimes, there have been it was the things he would come up with serendipitously. He would kind of get lost in the middle of a spiel or something, and he'd throw stuff in. And we didn't ask him to improvise. And afterwards, he'd always apologize, but sometimes it was really good stuff. To give you an example, he finally has he's got his shit together, and he's got down on one knee, and he's giving it. He's the assistant coach now, made the main coach,
right?
Because circumstances, obviously, you saw the movie.
Yep.
And he's sitting there waiting to give them a last instruction. And what I wrote in the script, I'm blanking out now. I wrote another line, but he couldn't think of the line that I wrote, and I could see he was searching. He couldn't remember it and couldn't remember. He said, "Boys don't get caught watching the paint dry." And I remember David and I were watching on the monitor. We looked at each other and said, "What does that mean?" We had no idea. And Dennis came over. "Oh, sorry, I forgot. I couldn't remember the line." I said, "What is don't get caught watching the paint dry?" So where did that come from? He said, "My dad used to tell that to me all the time." So I said, "Hey, it kind of works."
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, there are now T-shirts you can buy with that line. Unfortunately, Dennis has passed away, so we can't give him any kind of pros. It's not my I don't create the T-shirt.
Well, you talked about Gene Hackman kind of coming from that small town environment and kind of understanding that. That's something I think that is captured so well in the movie. I've spent a lot of time in those small towns, and like I had a girlfriend in college that lived in Lagodi in the Jack Butcher days, and Lagodi's a lot like that. And we see it kind of in Barbara Hershey's character. She has kind of that disdain for basketball because of Jimmy's future, yet she's in the stands for every game. How important was it for you to show kind of that side of those small towns in Indiana?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I set out to do is to try to create a tapestry of the culture, and why, and not necessarily answering the question, but to portray the relationship of basketball to the small town, how it affected different people in different ways. And, why was Indiana unique in that way? Again, it's not a question I really tried to answer, but I tried to ultimately create a positive spin on the basketball, so to speak, basketball by showing that it was a unifying element that would bring disparate parts of the community together to pull for one thing. And especially in this day and age, there's not many things that work that way to bring us all together. And I think that's why I tried to show various little pieces here and there, the rivalry between the different churches, and that happens in a lot of small towns, and how the one preacher and one minister decided to bring their disdain for each other and bring it together for the team. So again, it became a little bit of a metaphor, but I wanted to show how basketball has been, not so much anymore, a unifying element in bringing a community together and making it stronger.
Right. So just a couple more questions about Hoosiers. I think you've said in the past that you and David weren't sure what this movie was going to do for your career while making it. But when did you know that you had something special?
Well, we didn't know. Let me say that our first cut was really long. It was like 3.5 hours long. And then we started cutting like left and right in basketball. We came up with a cut that was 2 hours and 25 minutes long. And which is at the time, it was really important to keep movies under 2 hours because they wanted to get 3 screenings a night. And so we knew it was going to be a challenge, but we finally got, and we showed the film to a bunch of people. I mean friends and some trusted industry professionals, and people were complimentary. I mean, but you don't know. I mean, they were.
Right.
You never know. I don't care what anybody says. You never know until you get in front of an audience.
Right.
Because what happens is there is a synergy between the experience that you created with your film and the audience that affects each other, and you'll find that people laugh in places you never thought they were going to laugh. Sometimes good, sometimes not good, and they would become connected to some characters more than others. And it was not until that. And by the way, so our the distribution company, Orion Films, told us that we couldn't. Every director gets one free test screening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they told us that in our one test screening, it had to be under 2 hours, and I remember very distinctly, we came up with a cut that's 2 hours and 12 minutes long, and they wouldn't do it. And then David went to the DGA, and the DGA called them up and said, "You have to, it's not just that the director gets a cut; they get also a screening, a free screening. They get it at their whatever length they want." So they had to go forward with this, and we screened it in a southern, again, because it's so Indiana centric, Midwest centric. We didn't know how a shopping mall audience, and that's what they usually are. So it was a theater in Irvine, California, Orange County, and the way you recruit the people who watch it it's part of a shopping center. They hand out flyers. Well, you want to see a free movie, and they'll describe it, Midwest basketball, whatever. So 200 people have no idea what they're going to see, and they're just randomly shopping. Irvine shopping mall, and I knew that was a time that Dave and I said to each other, what happens in the screen will determine maybe the rest of our lives, and it certainly will determine the rest of the movie's life, because this distribution company did not want to release it nationally. They were not interested in doing that. They didn't finance it. It was a politically difficult situation.
Right.
They didn't think that there would be much appeal to it outside of the state of Indiana, and so the screening was a spectacular success. And it was like I remember, when people stood up at the end of the movie and started cheering, Dave and I were weeping. We were just totally weeping. We knew we had something, because people responded to that film in such a visceral way, and the way in which we wanted to, even more than we wanted to. Again, we mentioned I didn't realize the movie is so funny. People were laughing in places and it was okay for the most part. And it was. I remember because the president of Orion Pictures met us outside, shook his head, and he said, "That was the highest score Orion Pictures has had in a test screening in the last 15 years.
Wow.
And it was like, he said, "Okay, here's the deal." Because we were also fighting him on the title. He hated the title Hoosiers. He wanted it called The Last Shot, in part because it translated better to Hoosiers was not translatable to different languages worldwide. So I remember he said something to us. Congratulations! I never saw that coming. And and all right, here's the deal. You can have your title. You have to, but I'm not going to let you release it at this length, even it worked like gangbusters. You're going to release it for less than 2. It has to be less than 2 hours. And the third thing was, here's what I want to do. I want to release it in Indiana only. And if we don't do well there, we're not getting a national release. So that's when we knew, well, if they don't like this in Indiana, they love it in Irvine, something's wrong.
Right.
we were actually worried about that. It was a concern of ours because we thought, well, maybe they are looking at this like Irvine people are looking at like this. This is like a French comedy or something.
Right.
So culturally different from who they are. And then, there was a lot of pushback in Bloomington, Indiana on Breaking Away. There was a lot of people, and I understand because I had an issue with Breaking Away myself in one regard, the casting. I know the people in Bloomington. I know the people who live around Bloomington who are ostensibly called the Cutters. Mm-hmm. Those aren't those people that they cast. They aren't that Southern, Indiana Hoosier. And they were like, and it's understandable. The guy who directed the film had Peter Yates, I believe. I don't think he'd ever heard of the state of Indiana.
Oh, wow.
He took the job. Well, he's British, and so he didn't have any need to connect the characters, the actors to the location and the culture. It wasn't his interest, and I get that. Mm-hmm. I just know that, the father who was the mill cutter, that nothing at all like that's nothing like the stone millers, the stone cutters rather, that I knew in Bedford and Bloomington.
Right.
Not the right accent, nothing about it. It was just an odd combination. I make this point where that nobody outside of Bloomington would have noticed these things or cared. And it didn't really affect the movie, whether the movie worked or not, because it worked great. Mm-hmm. But we thought that we might get that hypercritical look from people from this state, and they would say, well, that would never happen here, or I don't believe that character, whatever. So we were actually really, really worried. We did not think we had it in the bag after that Irvine screen. We thought we might have it in the bag nationally. We didn't think we had it in the bag just in Indiana, though.
Right. Well, does it, I guess, how special is it? Or does it surprise you that, 34 years later, people are taking trips to the gym just to kind of step out on the court and be in the middle of where it all happened?
I think that the best way of putting it is that when I wrote the script, I knew it was a tremendous long shot that it would ever get made, only because of the numbers. The numbers are there are over 100,000 screenplays registered at the Writers Guild every year in Los Angeles. That doesn't even count New York. And less than 200 or 300 get made. The second part was once we got it, we got the money and the green light. We felt while we were making it that we were on the precipice of disaster every step of the way. And part of it was we just didn't have the experience of making movies. We did face all sorts of weather problems, budget problems, and not to speak of showing up at Hinkle Fieldhouse and no one showed up, no one was there. And then we get to that cut, and they still don't want to release it nationally. They still don't believe in it. And so we're thinking they may be right. They know more than we do. So we're thinking no one may ever see this movie except the people in Indiana. And so the fact, and obviously 98% of movies that are released are kind of released, especially back then. They come out, they have their moment in the sun, and 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks later, they're gone, and you never think about them again unless you watch them on television many years later. They don't live on in the culture. Most films don't live on in popular culture.
Mhm.
If you look at the vast number of movies made every year, maybe a handful, maybe 20, sustain in popular culture. So the fact that we've had 2 movies that have sustained in popular culture is beyond shocking. I just don't know how it even happened. It just we're so lucky. We are so lucky. That's
Yeah.
it's just great fortune.
Well, you talked about that. You followed up Hoosiers with Rudy several years later. What was kind of the difference for you in writing that script, where you were staying a little more true to that original story than you did in Hoosiers?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of things. I had a little more confidence, although, you never find altogether the kind of confidence. I mean, I'm about to sit down and write my 38th script, and I'm still terrified I'm not going to be able to. So I would say that I was, when I was writing Rudy, I was a little more, I knew I would get to, it's almost like deciding to become a mountain climber and never having climbed a mountain.
Right.
That's where I was with Hoosiers. With
Mhm.
Rudy, I knew it was another mountain and it was going to be different than Hoosiers, but I already climbed a tough one. So I felt more confident I could get to the top. How it would look and what would happen was something else, of course. And every script, every movie is different. But in order to tell a true story, I had to find what I considered the right balance between what really happened and I was very cognizant, very aware that I'm not making a documentary.
Right.
I just didn't need to cover every little piece of Rudy's life. And then I had to kind of make a determination about where I could invent, where I could composite characters, where I could um, where I could take something that was factually true and enhance it in a way to make it more dramatic without violating, some basic um, axiom which I learned to live by. This is what the axiom was, that someone, a really gifted screenwriter, was asked this very question: how do you determine when you're writing a true story, what to invent and what to maintain truthfulness about?
Mhm.
And his axiom was a takeoff on the legal axiom, which is my attempt at every step of the way was to maintain fidelity to the spirit of the truth, if not the letter of the truth,
Right.
substituting truth law for truth. So I feel very comfortable that I never did anything that would violate that spirit.
Mhm.
And I, even to the point of, we made this movie for TriStar, and there was an executive who actually said, just making the tackle at the very end, just doesn't seem spectacular enough. Could he do something where it actually made a difference in how the game turns out? And I would say I would never make that movie.
Yeah.
That'd be complete, violation of the spirit of the truth, and the letter of the truth, obviously. So I did the character of, for example, the character of Forrest, who was the groundskeeper, was a combination of 3 different people who helped Rudy along the way.
Okay.
Rudy actually was given the key to a kind of a broom closet to live in that first year, just like the character in the movie. But it was a janitor who worked in the basketball arena. And then he actually got to know a groundskeeper who helped him get in. He could get into the field anytime, and he kind of ran around and helped in the field. So I just thought it was natural to combine those 2 characters. And then there was another character as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, one of the bigger elements about this people bring this one scene up more than any other scene. Sometimes critically, and sometimes in a positive way. And that's the jersey scene when they laid the jerseys on the table. Well, what happened in real life was that a number of the seniors who knew what Rudy put into it and knew that Rudy was promised by Ara Parsegian to dress for one game his senior year. And Devine didn't feel, the coach Devine did not feel obligated to that promise. These seniors went to the defensive coordinator and offered up their jerseys. Can Rudy please dress for me? I don't need to, I'm not going to be playing. So so you could please, go run out there in the field like you worked hard for. So that's what really happened. And I thought, just one person after another caught talking to the defensive coordinator. It wasn't, I wanted to create a visual correlation, something that created that what really happened, but in a little more dramatic way. I kind of turned up the knob. So I made it the head coach, Devine, and I decided to, rather than just people speaking it, that they would actually bring their jerseys in.
Right.
And so I think that probably exemplifies, how I work certain truths in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Well, Rudy is such a beloved movie, and I know you've mentioned this in the past. A lot of people probably don't realize that it was not a great success at the box office. Was there a period in time where you guys thought, kind of worried it might be a forgotten film?
Well, we just assumed it would be a forgotten film. It was, Hoosiers was more successful out of the gate and in terms being released. Think about this and how times were different in 1987 when Hoosiers was released. We were in the theaters for over 6 months. Well, there's no movie in the planet that would be a hit on movie screen, probably more than 6 weeks now.
Right.
So, and we end up being in the top 10 of domestic gross receipts. But with Rudy, we it wasn't a very good marketing campaign, and it just didn't click for people to come and see the movie in the theater, and for one reason or another. So we kind of we knew that's. And our reviews were not great either. Reviews for Hoosiers are probably a little better. I think if there was such thing as Rotten Tomatoes then, and you can't talk about it now because people review Rudy from a different perspective now than they did then.
Sure.
I'm talking about when they first came out, it'd be under 50%.
Yeah.
So we were pretty. The fact that it did not do well at the box office, we just thought it would just, we kind of thought about we really worked hard and that's too bad, and what's next. We were working on our next movies, and David had a job, I had a job, so I never considered, I just thought it was going to be buried in the dustbin of movies like it, and maybe it would be on the Late Show one time, some old when the movie old movie channel theater or old movie channel.
Right.
But, so what happened was a phenomena that was only likely back then, which was that remember how Blockbuster used to be so big, the Blockbuster video rentals and later DVD rentals. And that was a whole subculture and a whole world that really was a tremendous boon for the film business, because people who didn't want to lay out, however many dollars for a movie could rent the video or the DVD for $2-3 and bring it home. And I remember when Rudy came out, it was like 2-3 months after the release of the film, and it was on like 2 or 3 shelves at my local Blockbuster. And after about a month, it took up almost an entire section. So the demand for it was always gone. It became what they called at that time a blockbuster hit. So people started finding the movie on a video and DVD.
Right.
And weirdly enough, it slowly built, and it was in ways in which David and I were shocked, and we never believed it could have happened. Now I'll give you a perfect example. USA Today and Los Angeles Times did I think it was actually USA Today. It was back in 1998 or 99. It was about 4 or 5 years after Rudy came out, and listed the top football movies of all time. And I mean, there were probably only 30, and I think we barely made the top 20. And I think we're number 19 or something. And that, didn't surprise us. We thought that's kind of how people thought of it, as, critically and otherwise. They did the same thing this year, top movie this past year. It was like 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Rudy was number 1.
Wow.
So that's how the reputation of it has increased. And people now they say Rudy is now a word in our language. He's another Rudy. People know it. When somebody says he's another Rudy, you know what he means.
Yeah.
So who knew?
Yeah, right. So you mentioned a little earlier, but a few years ago, you'd go on to write and direct My All-American. I know you've said in previous interviews that directing wasn't completely foreign to you because you'd done some second unit stuff with Hoosiers and Rudy. But what was kind of the new twist to the job when you took on that role?
Yeah. So what it wasn't just that I directed second unit. The way in which David and I worked together making movies, we kind of worked as a team, making decisions that were creative decisions, having to do with casting, production design, wardrobe, props, so on and so forth. And a lot of times David just said, "Look, I don't have time. Just you go pick out the uniform. You take care of this area. I'll take care of this area."
Right.
And so, yeah, in many ways, and doing pre-production for My All-American, I felt like I had been there 100 times before. I felt like, I knew what to do. I knew how to make a decision, and I knew what I wanted.
Right.
And it's just about communication.
Mm-hmm.
What was different, and what David was very good at, were two things. One, David was great at just creating a beautiful frame. His
Sure.
dad, cinematographer, or his dad was a photographer, and David had a great eye, knew how to block and set, and he knew how to make scenes he knew where to find the air and the space and the emotion in scenes. And that's not always on the page. It comes between the energy of the actors that you find in rehearsing. So that was one area which I was new at. And the other was communicating with actors. I was a little nervous about that because every actor comes from different schools of training and have their own language. And it's important to create an environment of safety and support for actors to know that you have their back, because they create very vulnerable spaces for themselves when they're acting. And I was lucky to have a week of rehearsal for My All-American, and I had some very deep discussions with the actors, and I got some, we worked together on scenes, but my most important part of that time was finding out where I could be of help and where we could work together, and that we went through every scene and every line of dialogue, and to make sure that we are all on the same page. And so by the time we got to the set, a lot of those questions and a lot of the kinds of situations that could arise that could cause problems were averted by those early rehearsal times.
Right.
But again, I was never totally comfortable until I did it. And then once I felt like secondhand.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that I never had worked with actors before, because I had, because the way in which David and I worked primarily was that I was in charge of the script. If anybody had a problem, any actor had an issue with the scene or a line or the character development or growth or arc, that they should come and talk to me. So I had a lot of really great relationships with actors talking about the part and the role. So I understood languaging at that time. I understood actors' language and how actors' training would shape and shift the way in which they communicated their thoughts, their ideas, and their desires.
Right.
Just for example, you haven't mentioned a third movie we made called The Game of Their Lives, which was a soccer movie that was a bomb. When I could talk about that at great length. But the actor in charge was the lead actor was Jerry Butler. And when David said, go talk to Angelo if you have any problems with the script, he came to me every day. He had issues with, he's like a former lawyer. And he drove me nuts, but it was really, but in a good way, because he challenged me to think about, and, we would have great debates, but we both had great respect for each other. And we finally, we found a way to work that was really helpful and beneficial to both of us. And I'll give you an example of how well we clicked in our own dialogue and finding his character. And that was, there was a big scene where he had to give a locker room speech, so to speak, to fire up his boys before the big game at the end. And I had I had written a version of it that I knew wasn't great. It was just kind of a placeholder. And I told Jerry at the time, look, there's this one section, this one great last speech. It has to work. It's daunting. It's difficult. You live in the land of cliche. It's so cliched, locker room speeches, firing people up. And I threw this challenge at him. I said, by the end, this was one of the last scenes we were shooting. We were in Rio de Janeiro. I said, by this time, you should know your character better than I know him.
Right.
Okay. So let me propose something. I'm going to write a new version of that locker room speech. I'm going to give it to you, and I want you to rewrite it, as your character would say. Then you're going to give it back to me. Then I'm going to rewrite you, and then I'm going to give it to you, and you're going to rewrite me. And then on the fifth iteration of this, we will find the best version of it. And that's exactly what happened.
Nice. It's interesting way to kind of process that. So, in My All-American, you have the story of Freddie Steinmark, of course, who's played amazing casting with Finn Wittrock. They look so similar. And I wasn't really familiar with that story going in, but it's a sad story yet inspiring, the work he did. It's kind of one of those guys that make you question how good a person you are. So how was it to work on that project, and how important was it to you to kind of tell that story?
Well, I was offered the story, and the thing that my most difficult challenge with Freddie, it was in the Freddie story, was he was just almost too good.
Yeah.
It's hard to root for a character without flaws.
Yeah.
Nobody loves Mr. Perfect, and he was kind of that guy, and so I had to do a really deep dive into kind of who he was and where he came from, and what his life was, as a kid and high school. And I found some interesting things that were not all perfect, like his relationship with his father. And it was very loving and very close, but his father was very demanding, and very critical. And he was on Freddie all the time. To give you an example, Freddie had like one game in high school, he had 5 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, but he fumbled the ball twice. And when he got home, his dad just ripped him up one side down the other for fumbling, to the point where they actually got into a fist fight. So I thought this is a great way to go. But in order to make the movie, we had to get the permission of the Steinmark family, and that wasn't going to fly. I couldn't take it dark. I couldn't take it dark. I was also I was asked to make sure the movie be PG. So it's a lighter, even though it's a tragedy and inspiring. The other films that we've made are much darker, and I probably would have chosen a darker palette if I was involved in different circumstances where I could invent a lot more than I did. But the family was in very, very much involved in the script had to pass. We had to pass approval of the family, and the people making the film wanted to make sure it's a PG movie. So
sure,
those are my 2 restrictions. But I did the best job I could, and I tried to get some darkness in there. But before the tragedy struck. So listen, every script, every project has their challenges, and there are obstacles everywhere you go. It's just not something I complain about ever. It's just the hand you're dealt. You try to make the best out of what you're given.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for talking about your career some, and a couple more questions before we get out of here that are kind of just general sports movie questions. I've always been a big fan. I've always thought as an actor, Kevin Costner is one of the great sports film actors that is out there, and putting work in to deliver that medium. As another kind of icon of the sports movie, what are some of your favorite sports movies over the years?
Yeah, people always ask this question, and it's I know how to answer the question, but it's been the same answer for about 20 years, and that's because I don't watch sports movies.
Okay.
I can't. If I know there's a coach and I know the coach is going to give a locker room speech, I cannot begin to watch that movie. It's almost like asking a farmer, who tills a field, to go in and enjoy the field.
Okay.
In some way. I mean, I know the architecture, I know the choices. I just can't let go and just let it wash over me. I was told I must see the new Ben Affleck movie about he's a coach, and I said, oh God, I'd rather watch anything than that. And nothing against Ben, and I'm sure it's a fine movie. So, but let's say probably Raging Bull would be number one. I would say Bull Durham is up there. Ron Shelton is a friend of mine. He's a good writer. And Field of Dreams, although I will say that my Field of Dreams is an unusual movie insofar as when I watched it, I remember thinking about 3/4 of the way through, I wasn't really with it. It just seemed like there were too many storylines going through it at the same time, and I wasn't really, where's this all going? What's this all about? I just didn't connect to me. And then all of a sudden there at the end, and in part it was that beautiful, surprising connection between father and son when they asked to play catch, and then just a phenomenal score, a film score by James Horner.
Yeah.
I was like, when they pulled up and away, Bill Did They Come, and the lights for all the cars coming, I just started weeping. I was like, any movie can make me cry. I'm not a big crier. That filmmaker's done a job. They've done a good job. So, I don't really know how much of why that's called a sports movie. There's not very many sports in it. But
right.
If people want to lump it that way, I'll put it in my top 5.
Okay. Those are kind of 3 unique choices that are kind of get away from that locker room talk, there at the end. So, with these movies, I've always thought that the reason why people love them is that we kind of see the human side of the athlete that we may not get to see with, a LeBron James or some big star every day. Why do you think people connect with these movies so much?
Well, it's always about the characters, and they say that the successful movies in popular culture are dependent on the perfect combination of the universal and the unique. Mm-hmm. And that is, there have to be enough things that a character is going through as experiencing, challenging his challenges, his emotional obstacles, etc., that just about anybody can relate to them. At the same time, you have to create a world and maybe situations that make you feel like you've never seen it before, even though you have. And that was probably the greatest compliment that we got in Hoosiers was from LA Times critic who was writing for GQ at the time, and he described Hoosiers as getting on a train where you knew the destination and you were pretty sure what this countryside was going to look like and how you're going to get there, and then being on the train and seeing it for the first the filmmakers make you feel like you've never seen it before, even though it's very familiar. And I think that's really the secret to working in mass culture, I think, and being successful is creating existing genre or story form and making it feel fresh, making it feel unique, and make it feel new, even though it's not. So, and that's one of the problems that we had with getting Hoosiers made was people couldn't reduce the story to a log line that would go either on a poster or advertisement and make people feel like it was interesting enough. I mean, if you reduce Hoosiers to one or two lines, a down and out coach goes to a small town and whips the boys into shape and they end up being successful or winning the state championship. It was like, I don't think I'd go see that movie.
Right.
It feels like one big cliche. And that's one element of it. What was the question? Because I think that you.
I was just kind of asking like why you think people connect with these sports movies so much.
I know. The other thing is that I remember I had a sign up on my computer when I wrote the script. This is not a sports movie. It's never about the sports. Anytime a sports movie is about the sport and really focuses too much on the sport, then you lose the characters. Right. The greatest compliment that we got, that we still get from like Rudy, is, you know what? I saw that movie and it made me cry. And guess what? Not only do I not like football, not only do I not like Notre Dame, I don't even like sports. Right. And I connected to it and made me cry. And that's what's important when in working in the genre, is that you reach that person, that you're not just doing this film for Notre Dame football fans, or Indiana basketball fans. You're doing it for people who could care less. So it's always about the characters. That's the secret. It's about their characters and their journey.
And then a similar vein, I have a friend that won't watch Hoosiers because he's from Kentucky, and I said, don't think of it as the Hoosiers you root against. So,
yeah, it's not connected to Indiana University.
Right. So my final question.
I will say I wouldn't watch anything that said Wildcats. It was about a high school basketball team in Kentucky.
Well, there you go. So my final question. I used to live in New Harmony, Indiana, and I know you used to work a little bit with the New Harmony Writers Project, and so I appreciate the work you do to kind of give back to the community in Indiana, Southern Indiana. What is your a best piece of advice you could give a writer that's trying to work on their craft?
Never give the power away to other people to tell you what you can and you can't do. And one of the biggest mistakes I made when I wrote Hoosiers is I wrote this first draft, and of course, if you write with any truth and on it, well, I don't care how you describe it. There's no possible way to be objective about your own work. You cannot know whether you've accomplished what you set out to do, whether it's any good or not. I mean, when I finished Hoosiers, I entertained the possibility that it was terrible, that it was embarrassing. And the first person I gave it to was the person I respected the most and trusted the most, who was a big time producer, who gave me my first job out of film school and trained me, basically. So I thought, this is a guy who knows the language. He's gonna be able to tell me the truth about this. And he read it and he said it was a piece of garbage, and that I should go back and now never write again. And I took his word for it, and I took that script and I threw it in the back of my closet, and I never let anybody read it, including David, for more than a year.
Yeah.
And I happened to be sitting at a dinner party next to a guy who had just won a Pulitzer Prize for his biography of Charles Lindbergh. It was, to tell the story correctly, he hadn't won the Pulitzer Prize yet. He had won the American Book Award for a biography of Maxwell Perkins. And he had just finished a book on Sam Goldwyn. He was about to write the Lindbergh book, for which he which he did win the Pulitzer Prize. However, he was somebody I had tremendous respect for. Obviously, a great writer, an intellectual, and his dad was a big-time producer, and his brother ran the biggest agency in the business, ICM at the time. And we started talking, and he told me that he thought I had the sensibility of a writer, which kind of surprised me. And then I admitted to him that I had once written something, but it was so terrible I never let anybody else read it. And he said, "You let one person decide whether something you wrote was good or bad," and it became a big drawn out thing between the two of us about him wanting to read it. And ultimately, I broke down and let him read it. And and he called me up and said, "There's a great movie in here. It's long, but I'll help you edit it." And so he helped me kind of cut it down. It was 180 pages. Most scripts are 120. And so one of the things that I think was drawn to with the movie Rudy was the fact that Rudy never allowed anybody to tell him what he could or couldn't do, what was possible or not possible. He never gave away his power. So I think for any writer out there, don't, even if you give it to a bunch of trusted critics, don't let them, if you believe in it, if there's something that means something to you, you're going to find somebody else who's going to believe in it too.
Right.
And there is such a thing as craft, and there is such a thing. I mean, if people can give you honest responses, helpful responses, if you have an intention of trying to accomplish something, and it doesn't work, then the craftsman side of a person you give it to can help you realize that. But don't let negative criticism get in the way of moving forward. The second thing about, writers write. Tons of people talk about writing, and tons of people talk about what they're going to write next. But true writers write every day. And that's what I would say. The advantage for being a writer, as opposed to just about anything else in the business, is that you control that. Actors can't get up and act. Directors can't get up and direct. Producers can't get up and produce. But writers can get up every day and write. And sometimes you gotta one of the most successful writers in the film business, Larry Kasdan, who has Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars movies, on and on. I got to know him early on. He was working for an advertising agency in Los Angeles. He'd get up every morning at like 5 o'clock and write for 2 hours before he went to work.
Right.
And he wrote, I believe, 8 screenplays before anybody read anything that would caught their attention.
Wow.
but he never stopped writing. And I think that's critical. You need material. Don't sink everything into one deal, one script. It may not be the perfect fit. There is such a thing as the bias of primary experience. Just because you lived it, it made you cry, it made you weep, made you laugh, made you feel all these emotions. Maybe that's not necessarily what you should write, but you should write a variation of that. Put it be one step removed, still feel those feelings, but do it in a way in which you can combine, those left brain and right brain.
Yeah.
Your different chakras. I think the best writers write from all the chakras.
Mhm.
They write from their head, their neck, their heart, their stomach, etc. And you have to be able to be open to not intellectualizing what you're writing, and not writing just to whatever comes out of your gut and your heart. I mean, there's certain kinds of writing where that can work. I mean, but if you're talking about film writing, no, it's much more rigorous.
Right. Well, that's great advice. I want to thank you so much for the career you've had and the joy you've given to so many of us that have watched your films. And I especially want to thank you so much for taking the time today to talk with me.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Yep. Well, we want to thank Angelo so much for being on the show. It was a great honor for me, definitely, from the movies he's made to have him on the show. And that was awesome. Awesome interview with him. But I want to talk about sports movies now, Jonathan. And one thing I think about sports movies is, I said this about found footage a while back. I almost feel like you could have a sports theme in every genre of movies. You could even have a horror sports movie, honestly.
Oh, for sure. Why hasn't that happened yet?
Right? I don't know. Yeah, I would think something like that could happen, though. But I kind of wanted to break this down and talk about maybe like our favorite sports movie in a couple different genres. And what I was going to do, I'll start with, we'll start in like a dramatic movie. Do you have a favorite like dramatic sports movie?
Man, like my favorite, we talked about this a couple times on the podcast, and my favorite sport that like I follow is basketball. And basketball seems to be like the forgotten sport for the dramatic sports movie, right?
Right.
Like, you get a couple comedies and things like that, but you don't ever really get a good basketball dramatic movie. You have your Glory Roads and things like that. You know what? I guess you could call it a drama, but Blue Chips is my all-time favorite basketball movie with Shaq and Penny Hardaway and Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a good movie. Right there with Shaq and Penny being like at like right before the NBA, like right before that was about to explode. That's pretty wild that you have a legendary big man and point guard combo like in a movie together before they became Shaq and Penny. So
yeah,
but the Way Back is also a good one from recent. That's a really good basketball movie. I suggest people watch that one as well.
Yeah, definitely. What's funny about Blue Chips is like I always loved that movie too, and another reason I really liked it was the big team they have to beat in the end is Indiana. But it's kind of funny because like
that's how you know it's fiction.
That Indiana team has like Bobby Hurley on it that played for Duke, and it's kind of funny to see him in an Indiana uniform. But I mean, my favorite all-time dramatic sports movie is Hoosiers. There's no doubt about that. And like I tell the Kentucky fans, it's not like the Hoosiers that it's all about high school basketball, and definitely should be watched by everyone. I think it'll bring a tear to your eye. I think
I do need to watch it, and I heard you did tell Angelo about why I refused to watch Hoosiers for so long.
Right. He had a nice little comeback for you, so. But another movie I really love that's kind of dramatic, and it's a more recent movie, is Moneyball. I just love that movie. I could watch it kind of over and over. I thought Brad Pitt did an excellent job, even Jonah Hill in that. For something that could be a really boring topic, That's an excellent movie in my opinion. So
man, I went back and watched Moneyball about a month ago, and I had forgot how good that movie is. And baseball is not my sport at all.
Right.
But they made the analytics of baseball interesting somehow.
Yeah, I watch that probably once a year at least, and enjoy it every time. So I saw that one in the theater, honestly. So yeah, it's a great one. How about comedies? You got a favorite sports comedy?
Oh, all-time favorite sports comedy is Caddyshack.
Okay.
I'm gonna allow it because that movie's very much about golfing.
Yeah. That's up there for me too. I'll probably go just to change it up. I'll say Major League.
Major League's great.
I enjoy those. Let's see. I had a little list here pulled up. Let's see what else. I'll throw Happy Gilmore in there. I think that's kind of
for sure.
I think that counts.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, sports and comedies go together well too. Kind of like the dramatic elements in movies. I don't know why that is, but
I can't believe I forgot this one. White Men Can't Jump.
Oh yeah,
God, that's great.
Another good one. How about let's go one more category. Let's go with the documentary.
Oh well, I mean, there's one, right? Like there's the one, and I know it's probably yours too. Hoop Dreams.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there a better sports documentary?
I think Hoop Dreams set the mold for sports documentaries for sure. And then, I mean, ESPN's killing it, man, with their 30 for 30 stuff. And like The Last Dance, things like that. And that OJ one, Made in America, man, if you haven't watched that, I know it's hard to watch shit that's like 7 hours, but damn, it's good. So, but yeah, I'm sure there's some I'm missing, but Hoop Dreams is definitely the standard bearer.
And then you could really just say 30 for 30, right? Because those are like full length documentaries on like one. There's so many that I think we went through them on a live stream one night. Just the amount of just awesome documentaries out there.
Yeah, and I feel like they rarely make a bad one. I mean,
there's always something interesting,
even if it's like a sport I don't care about.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there are a ton of great sports movies, and I'm sure we'll dive into those a little more in depth in the future because I love to watch them. As much as kind of any other type of movie. So
sorry, I was supposed to say they make you feel so good. Like you feel like if a dramatic sports movie's done right, you feel like you've achieved something with them. So
yeah, you say that, and I want to go back to Hoosiers because obviously we talked a lot about that in the interview. You almost feel like you're a part of that team in that movie, because you're in the locker room with them. You feel like an extra member of that team, and when they have success, when they fall, you feel like you're there with them.
Right.
And a lot of movies kind of take on that formula now, but yeah, it's a good formula to have, I think. So,
yes.
So I think that's the show for today. Great interview. We talked a little bit about sports movies, and I hope you guys enjoy this show. I hope you enjoy all the upcoming shows and all the stuff on YouTube. And check us out. And I'm going to let Jonathan talk about where you can find him online right now.
You can find me at Bombastic Reviews on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. And, of course, you can always find me over at Smores Indoors Podcast YouTube channel and SmoresIndoorsPodcast.com. Go to it, people.
Yes, definitely go to SmoresIndoorsPodcast.com. And definitely keep watching us here on S'mores Indoors Podcast YouTube channel. Got a lot more stuff coming up in the near future, including the Hot Pepper Challenge Round 4, Saturday, January 9th. Jonathan's got his reefers there, and we're going to chew our way through those apparently now with these dried ones. So.
They look like dead roaches. Like,
no.
It's terrible.
And they smell to high heaven.
They smell so bad.
But guys, until next time, when we see you again in whichever form we're in, take it easy.
Later.